Hi, everyone. I'm Bill Squadron, president of Our Energy Policy, and thank you for joining us today for our conversation as part of our Spotlight series with Mike Sommers, the chief executive of the American Petroleum Institute. Mike has been leading the API for more than 5 years and through one of the most turbulent times I think we've had in our lifetime, through a pandemic, through a change in administrations, instability, war in the Middle East. And so we're delighted to have him here to really dive into some of these questions that are just so challenging and difficult. And of course, Mike, before his role with us, had a career that included Capitol Hill, the White House. So, Mike, welcome. Thank you for joining us, and we'll dive right in if that's okay with you.
Sounds great. Thanks, Bill, for having me.
Great. Well, I would love to start with an issue that I think is just on everyone's mind, which has to do with national security. I mean, we're all aware of the things going on in the world. Your industry has such a vital role to play. So when we think about energy and national security, how does API approach that area, and what do you see going forward?
Yeah, thanks again, Bill, for having me. This is such a very important topic right now, in particular, given the volatility throughout the world. I mean, if you think about the fact that, we're now dealing with a hot war in the Middle East, which is a significant oil and gas producer. Of course, the terrible war that's going on in Ukraine as a consequence of extreme Russian aggression. And that's not even to mention some of the other hotspots that we're keeping an eye on, potentially some conflict in Venezuela, between Venezuela and Guyana, both major oil producers right now. And then, of course, everyone knows about the real concerns about what's going on between China and Taiwan. We're dealing with probably one of the most hot situations in the world right now, volatile situations that we've seen really in my lifetime. And energy security, I think, is really at the top of the agenda for every lawmaker right now, because the United States, of course, is the largest producer of oil. It's the largest producer of natural gas. It's the largest refiner of gasoline and diesel products in the world. And that is something that we should be proud of. But it also gives us a level of security that we have not seen really in our entire history. I'll give you an example of that. So when Russia invaded Ukraine, the United States oil industry immediately cut off imports of Russian crude oil into the United States. That was before the United States government even asked us to do so. And the only reason that we were able to do that is because the United States is now producing about 13 million barrels of oil every single day. If this had happened just 10 years ago, we would not have been able to cut off Russian oil imports into the United States. So that's just one example of the incredible resource that we have here and the ability that it gives us to be more flexible with our foreign policy.
Let me follow up on something you mentioned because it's so interesting. What's happened in the past 10 years that's created that change that has put us in such a stronger position?
Yeah, well, let's just go back to 2008. So in 2008, the United States was producing about 6 million barrels of oil every single day, and that number was going down rapidly. And if you look at all of the energy outlooks at that point, almost all of them predicted that the United States would be going down to 5 or 4 million barrels of oil production every single day. What happened in 2008? That's really when the fracking revolution took place, where the United States producers of both oil and natural gas discovered a new way to extract more resource out of the ground. That's now known as hydraulic fracturing. And hydraulic fracturing has been done for decades and decades in this country, but they continued to improve that technology over time and make it and have the ability to do it at scale. And we're at a point now where 99% of the oil and gas wells in this country right now are fracked. This is a very safe technology that has allowed us to produce more resource. We're now at a point where we're also the number one natural gas producer in the world. Again, that number was going down in the mid 2000s. But now, as a consequence of this revolutionary technology that has really taken foot within the oil and gas industry, we're now the number one producer of natural gas. And by the way, the number one exporter of natural gas too, which has given us a level of energy security that we've never seen before.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about the fact that we've become literally over the last 10 years the leading exporter globally of liquefied natural gas. And this has really changed the dynamics significantly. How would you evaluate sort of the impact that that has had, and where do you see that going?
In fact, it was just last year that the United States overtook the Qataris as the #1 exporter of liquefied natural gas. You mentioned that I had a career on Capitol Hill. And again, back to the last time we really did a big energy policy bill until the Inflation Reduction Act. The real policy for the oil and gas industry at that point was we were going to be increasing the amount of natural gas that we were going to be importing into the United States. We're not importing a lot of natural gas into the United States right now. In fact, the only place that we're really importing natural gas is in the Northeast. And the reason why we're doing that is because they won't allow pipelines to go from Pennsylvania up to the rest of the Northeast. We have the natural gas; it's just that we can't get it to that part of the country. So it really has been a sea change. And we're now not only producing all the natural gas that the United States needs, which natural gas, by the way, makes up about 40% of the power that we use in the United States right now. We're also producing so much that we need more markets for it. The first LNG tanker that left the United States to supply the needs of our trading partners was in 2016. So here we are in 2024, just 8 years later, and the United States is now the #1 producer and exporter of natural gas throughout the world. And what a difference it has made. As a consequence of that, we've been able to surge imports into Europe, which needed it because they cut off Russian gas going into their countries. And we've been able to largely displace that gas with US LNG. And again, that gives us an ability to execute American soft power. We're able to export that US natural gas, and they're able to replace Russian gas, which was really supplying the Russian war machine. So it really has made an incredible difference. And it gives us the ability to have that flexibility within our foreign policy that we've never seen before.
So, this transformation with respect to natural gas, fracking, LNG exports really has had a huge impact on the Ukraine Russia conflict.
Oh, no question.
Yeah.
You think about the fact that we've been able to basically replace Russian natural gas with American natural gas, which, by the way, is produced cleaner, safer, transported in a safer manner than any other natural gas in the world. It's something that our policymakers should be applauding and thanking our producers for. But of course, we're dealing with a very divided Washington, and it has instead become a political football, unfortunately.
Well, you mentioned pipelines and the access that that can provide, and the situation in the Northeast. How do you all approach this issue of permitting that has become such a challenge in a lot of respects? For sort of the entire energy industry, for the oil and gas industry, for a lot of the clean energy and renewable fuels that are attempting to, kind of also grow. How do you all look at that permitting issue right now?
Yeah, I mean, it is, I think, the #1 issue, #1 challenge for American infrastructure development right now is the permitting process. We have a permitting process that's completely broken. And this isn't just a challenge for our industry, which of course deals with problems related to building out the pipelines that our country needs. The Mountain Valley Pipeline is just the most recent example that it took an act of Congress to build a pipeline, literally took an act of Congress through the Inflation Reduction Act that it was actually able to get done. That's not how this process is supposed to work. There should be a certain policy that's driven by the departments, set out by Congress through a permitting process that actually makes sense. And if you think about the fact that we're now dealing with the situation where it's not just oil and gas infrastructure that we're having trouble building out, but it's also infrastructure for high-powered transmission lines. And if we're going to have other energies like wind and solar come onto the market, they're going to need to be building intrastate high-powered transmission lines to get the power from where it is to where it needs to be. And those are almost harder to build than pipelines in this country. So we need a comprehensive permitting reform bill to make it through Congress as quickly as possible. Unfortunately, we're in a political year, so it's unlikely that's going to happen in 2024. But I'm hopeful post-election that we can get Republicans and Democrats together to get common cause together on getting a permitting process that actually makes sense. Unfortunately, this administration is actually making it harder to build energy infrastructure, not easier. There was some modest reform included in the Fiscal Responsibility Act. That was the bill that raised the debt limit. Unfortunately, that Fiscal Responsibility Act, those reforms were almost immediately reversed by the Council on Environmental Quality with their changes to the NEPA process. We just saw last week, the administration came out with another policy on particulate matter that's going to make it very difficult to build out industrial facilities in this country. And that's just not oil and gas facilities, but that's all facilities, all infrastructure. So we're really going in the wrong direction on this. And it's really, again, going to require an act of Congress. But it shouldn't be that we're just designating infrastructure that needs to get built by acts of Congress. There needs to be a certain process that is put into place so that we can actually get this stuff built in a timely manner.
And can this be addressed federally, or are there also issues at the state and local level that need to be addressed as well? In other words, is there a single solution that can really kind of change the game, or do we have multiple layers that all need to be addressed?
Yeah, I do think that there are multiple layers. You know, one of the challenges that we're having right now, for example, is we're trying to build out CO2 pipelines in the Midwest because we want to be able to transport CO2 from ethanol plants in Iowa and throughout the Corn Belt in the United States, so that we can then sequester that CO2, to address the challenge of climate change. But building out CO2 pipelines in the Midwest has become controversial as well. And that's all because of local opposition, unfortunately. So I do think it is a multi-layered problem, but there, some states do it better than others. For example, it's easy to build pipelines in the state of Texas. That should be no secret. But other states, we have a more challenging environment. But unfortunately, we're at this point where to build out energy infrastructure, it's almost like you have to run a political campaign to get it done. That's really not how it should be.
In a related topic, the issue of lease sales on federal lands.
Yeah.
That's been obviously a very controversial area. How do you see that going into 2024? And what are API's priorities there? And what are the big opportunities and challenges in that area?
Yeah, this is a major issue. The one data point that you need to consider is that 25% of American oil and gas production is on federal lands or in federal waters. So a lot of people just think about the federal lands, but of course the entire Gulf of Mexico and the development there those are federal waters in the Gulf of Mexico. And it has become much, much harder to get these leases both on federal lands and on federal waters as a consequence of some policy changes from this administration. So, for example, in the Gulf of Mexico, every 5 years, they renew what's called the 5-year program, which authorizes lease sales within that 5-year period. And we're going to be dealing with the fewest amount of lease sales in the history of these 5-year programs, which go back to the 1960s. In fact, in 2024, there won't be one single lease sale. The only lease sales that will have occurred under President Biden were, again, mandated by the Inflation Reduction Act, thanks to Joe Biden, who got those lease sales mandated last year. So it shouldn't be that way. It shouldn't be that it takes an act of Congress to get these regular lease sales completed. And by the way, the barrels produced in the Gulf of Mexico are the lowest carbon barrels in the world. We know that we're going to need a lot more oil and gas into the future, and we should be producing it in the safest way and in a way that has the least amount of impact on the environment. So we really need to get those lease sales going again. The same is true onshore as well. Everyone knows or has heard of the Permian Basin, that most prolific oil basin in the world right now, most of which is in Texas, but a third of it is in the state of New Mexico. In New Mexico, it's all federal lands. And it's increasingly difficult to get those leases and to get permits to actually operate on those leases right now. And so guess where all the investment is going? It's going to the Texas side of the border, where it's all on private and state lands. And again, it's 25% of American production is on federal lands and in federal waters. And there should be a better process to get those leases done.
You mentioned a minute ago the issue that's obviously on a lot of people's minds, which is the environmental question that's associated with all of the things that you've been talking about. And how do you all approach that in terms of balancing the environmental impact, um, the need to respond to climate change by transitioning to renewable fuels with our need to have domestic energy security, meet our domestic requirements? How do you approach, kind of that dichotomy or that balance in a way that, is responsible and gets us to a future that, we all want?
Yeah, absolutely. And, we view it as a dual challenge, right? We're going to continue to have to provide the world with the energy that they need. But at the same time, we have to do it in a way that is more sustainable. And I would say that in my time at API, which is, almost 6 years now, the focus on environmental performance almost increases almost every single year. And the industry is actually making significant investments in improving reduction of emissions in particular. So, we've worked with Congress to enhance what's called the 45Q tax credit, which is a tax credit to incentivize the build out of carbon capture and storage technologies. And we're making real progress, and we're putting billions and billions of dollars into those investment right now. And that's a great partnership with the federal government and API member companies. Another example is there was a new tax credit on hydrogen, the so-called 45V tax credit. And there are billions of dollars that are waiting to be invested in building out hydrogen as well. But at core, the world's going to continue to use a lot of oil and gas far into the future. And in fact, we look at demographic numbers. The world population is going to grow by 20% by 2050, and energy demands are only going to go up. And most of that energy is still going to come from oil and gas and other sources. What we're going to need is more energy. We need build out of wind and solar and geothermal and other sources of energy, because energy demand is going up and population is going up. But we can't forget that we're going to have to continue to make these investments in oil and gas because these are depleting resources. And as a consequence of that, we need to continue to make billions of dollars of investment to find new resources to meet the world needs. So we're committed to continue to reduce emissions within our own operations, but a lot of the investment into these new sources of energy are also coming from the American oil and gas industry.
Yeah, and that was what I really wanted to ask you about, which is, as you all look at both addressing immediate needs and being part of that transition, as you described it, um, you mentioned carbon capture, you mentioned hydrogen. I mean, what are the technologies, the innovative approaches? I mean, as you talked about earlier, I mean, what the impact that hydraulic fracturing has had, right?
Yeah.
What do you see on the horizon as really, other game changers that can make a big difference in what we're all trying to achieve?
Yeah, and let me address that topic you mentioned, which is the energy transition. I really try not to use that term, because transition suggests that we're going to be moving from one thing to another, and very rarely has that happened in the history of energy. In fact, if you think about that, the last so-called transition we had was in the 1960s, when oil and gas overtook coal as the primary source of energy in the world. But still, in 2023, we used more coal than we did in the history of time. And in 2024, we'll beat the coal will beat the record that it set in 2023. So very rarely are we actually transitioning from one source to another. What happens is new sources come on, and those sources, become part of the energy mix as well. And we're for that because we're going to need a lot more energy. It's really more of an evolution or a transformation, but rarely have we ever gone, or ever, we've never gone from a situation where we've used a dense form of energy like coal or natural gas and oil and transition to a less dense form of energy like wind and solar. In fact, it seems to me that the next phase of this transition is really to nuclear, which is the densest form of energy that the world has ever known. But of course, the environmental community is opposed to advancement of nuclear as well, even though it is a no carbon source of energy. So we're going to continue to see a lot of advancement in the energy mix. We're going to get better at carbon capture technologies. We're going to get better at hydrogen, along with that partnership with the federal government. I think we're all hopeful that modular nuclear, starts to take hold. I think there are going to be continued advancements in geothermal as well. But again, we're going to need it all. And I know that the scientists and engineers in the oil and gas industries are really focused on making sure that we continue to improve our operations, reduce emissions, because we believe emissions are the real enemy here, not the industry. And it's really exciting what we see on the horizon because of that continued advancement and within the industry to ensure that we're reducing those emissions on a year-on-year basis.
Yeah, and as you say, I mean, it's really a shift in the composition of energy sources, and that shift to the degree that you all can play a part in it. How do you look at the technology and innovation side? Do you put resources into investment? I mean, you mentioned a couple of things you're doing with the federal government. What about within the industry itself? How do how
Yeah.
do you know how do your members and you as a leader kind of approach that?
Interestingly, as an organization, we adjust our organization to meet with the needs of our membership as well. So, 4 years ago, I'll give you an example. API didn't have a committee that was solely committed to addressing the climate challenge. API now has a climate committee, and policies have followed. We put out, after we developed the climate committee, our climate action framework, which you can find online at api.org/climate. And it's 5 policies and commitments that the industry is making on addressing the climate challenge. Right now, we're looking at how do we continue to serve our members' needs on low carbon solutions, and policies will follow that. So there are a lot of investments within the industry. And what API's role is to help ensure that the policy environment is right to ensure that those new energies make their way and have a voice within the policy space as well. So our organization has evolved as the industry has evolved. And we're leading the way and helping develop some of those policy solutions, like on CCS or on hydrogen, so that we can continue to see them deployed in a way that makes sense economically.
Just a last question or two, but you mentioned policy. Are there particular policy priorities as you look into this year? And then, of course, who knows what will happen after the election? We may or may not be in a different position. But what are the policy priorities that you feel should be at the top of the list,
Yeah.
on Capitol Hill and in the administration?
Just today, the United States Congress passed a bill to overturn the Biden administration policy of pausing export permits for liquefied natural gas facilities. We need to get that reversed. The world's going to continue to demand a lot of natural gas, and if we can't get it out of the United States, it's not going to be good for our partners, and it's certainly not going to be good for the natural gas industry. So that's a top priority for us. We need to get more lease sales in the Gulf of Mexico and onshore as well. So that's a real top priority for us. The Environmental Protection Agency is currently considering a new regulation on tailpipe emissions from conventional vehicles that would essentially say that 2/3 of the cars that are sold in the United States in 2032 would have to be EVs. Unfortunately, I think that is a pie in the sky dream. Consumers just aren't buying these cars right now. EVs have a key place in the energy future. but we can't skip a step. And unfortunately, we're skipping a step right here where it would make sense for hybrids to be the car in the near term, and then maybe later down the road when the grid is ready and when the technology catches up, you could go to a full EV fleet. But the American people aren't ready for that right now, and the grid is certainly not ready for it. So, unfortunately, because we're dealing with some of these hostile actions by this administration, we're not allowed. We're not don't have the ability right now to advance a lot of the key priorities that we want to do on emissions reduction and on advancing new fuels. But some of our top priorities are really in a reaction to some of these onerous regulations that are being pursued by the administration.
Thanks. And I guess my last question is just, is there any sort of final message you would like to deliver about, API's vision and, its role going forward as we, enter, this year, and what's your kind of position on the world stage and what you would like to accomplish?
Yeah, I mean, at our core, the organization is one that is built to advance the American oil and gas industry, and we've had great success over time. If you think about the fact that the United States is now the #1 producer of oil and natural gas in the world, no one would have thought that was possible, 10 years ago. And it has made a huge difference for American energy security and American foreign policy, and that's something that we should be really excited about. The world's going to continue to demand a lot of oil and a lot of natural gas into the future. In fact, we're at record levels in terms of demand for oil and demand for natural gas. The world now consumes over 100 million barrels of oil every single day. And the real question I think that policymakers have to ask is, where do we want that oil to come from? We want it to come from the safest, most secure, most environmentally responsible country in the world, the United States, or do we want to be getting it from regimes that are hostile to American interests? And I think the answer is pretty clear. We need to be producing more oil, more natural gas here. It's good for us, and it's good for our allies.
Mike, thank you very much. We really appreciate your taking the time, sharing these thoughts with us, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thanks, Bill.